It's nearly time to turn back the clock. We'll be falling back an hour this weekend when daylight saving time ends. But even that hour difference can have an impact on your health. Joining us live is Dr. Charlie Abraham, Chief Medical Officer, Dignity Health, St. Bernardine Hospital. Good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Tony.
Okay, we talk about this every year, and a lot of people have strong opinions about daylight savings. Can you explain the health effects it has on us, just to start out with?
Yeah, let's start out with talking about what is daylight saving is really. And daylight saving is when we really, it's not this November, it's in March, the second Sunday in March at 2 a.m. when we spring forward, when we actually have to wake up an hour earlier, and we stay in that zone for about 8 months. And then in a couple of days now, we're going to be going from daylight saving to standard time. So when you talk about the health effects of daylight saving, I think about this in a couple of ways. One is, what are the acute effects of changing to daylight saving time, which is basically, like I said, is in March. And as there's abundance of evidence that there's a lot of consequences to going with that change. And at the same time, going back to standard time, there are health effects. So for example, when you change to daylight saving time, there's a lot of things that happen inside the body. We know that there are increased risk of cardiovascular events, heart attacks, strokes, admissions to the hospital with acute fluttering of the heart. There's also mental health consequences, such as increased risk of suicide and overdose, increased ER visits to the emergency room in the hospital and return to the hospital, missed medical appointments, and also notably increase the motor vehicle crashes. There's about 6% increase when we go to daylight saving time. And I think what people get confused about is, what about when we go back to standard time and switch again? That switch twice a year, that seasonal switch, is that supposed to be good? And actually, it's not that great. Yes, when we go back to standard time, there is some scant evidence that show that maybe there's, let's say, less episodes of certain diseases, but really the sleep disruption is always there, and the mood disturbances, the safety is an issue, traffic accidents, increased suicide. And there's evidence that there's immunity issues
Absolutely. You know, because of all that, you listed so many factors there. Do you have tips on how to make this transition easier for us?
Yeah, so explain this just in brief moment here. There are three types of clock. There's the sun clock, is when the sun rises and sets, and that's the solar clock. There's our social clock, which is basically the schedule around which we arrange our days. So for example, when we go to school, when we go to work. And there's also an internal clock. We call it the circadian rhythm. It's actually an inside clock. And all these clocks have to be they have to be in sync for us to be healthy. So one of the things we could do, just understanding this, that the most important cue that our body gets to be healthy and to also interact with the environment is really the sunlight. So one thing we could do, one of the most important tips is, when you first wake up in the morning, exposure to sunlight for a prolonged time in the morning really helps you with that. And if there is no sunlight, then you could use the light that is offered by some of the devices on the industry. And also minimizing that light at night. So that's one of the important tips. Also, gradually, right before going into that switch in either direction, start about 2 weeks ahead with really arranging your schedule around that. Waking up 5 to 10 minutes earlier every couple of days. Switching your meals sometimes help. Exercise around where you do it. So the habits that you do and your social life should match up what's coming up in a couple of weeks, and that helps you mitigate some of these effects.
Wow, that is so interesting. I love that. Thank you so much for those tips. I will be getting more sunlight in the next coming days, earlier in the day, so that I'm not offset by all this.
Yes, and even though it sounds crazy, but like at night when you're driving and there is more sunlight, if you put your glasses on, the sunlight, you know, the polarized glasses, you also minimize the sunlight hitting your eye. It seems like our bodies are too sensitive to the light at night. Even a little bit of light, like a remote TV light, could throw off our internal clock, while in the morning you need a lot of it to really adjust to the time.
Good to know. Dr. Charlie Abraham, thank you so much for being with us and for that insight.